Well, I think there's a lot of things in the comics that haven't been explored cinematically before. First and foremost, we have the story with Peter Parker's parents. When I was thinking about the character, I was really curious about what happened to him when he was a young kid. I mean, he was raised by his aunt and uncle, but we had never met his parents, and I wanted to know the mystery and the story behind that. So that's the beginning of this of the untold story is starting off with his parents. Of course, there's the Gwen Stacy saga, which, if you're familiar with the comics, is a really fascinating, tragic, ultimately, but interesting storyline that is, at times controversial, but always interesting. And so I wanted to explore that. And then, of course, there's the villain, Kurt Connors, otherwise known as the Lizard, which was one of my favorite villains from the comics, and I thought it would be fun to give life to that. With 500 Days of Summer, it was a movie about the small moments in between two people, and maximizing the impact of these little private moments that happen between people. And I think that in Spider-Man, in The Amazing Spider-Man, there is a lot of that as well. That's the foundation on which the entire film is built. And then, there's action sequences, and I'd done music videos and commercials for 10 years before I did 500 Days of Summer, and there was a lot of technical parts of that filmmaking process, which was really fun to explore. And as a fan of action movies and as a fan of movies with a lot of scope, it was a great adventure, and it was just about putting the time in and orchestrating those sequences, and that was, in a real way, one of the most fun parts about the experience was developing and working on the action and the big scope. Ultimately, it's just about the time you have to spend on it. And when you're thinking about action sequences too, ultimately I believe that you got to look at them as scenes, and there's an emotional drive and impact, and characters are usually a little bit different at the beginning of them, and then they are at the end of them. And that was something that was fun to explore. Kurt Connors is the literal embodiment of one of the themes in the movie, which is we all have a missing piece. Peter is missing his parents and his father, and goes out in search of that. And Kurt Connors is missing an arm. And he is in search of that. And how we choose to fill that void is how we define ourselves. And that is something that if Peter Parker does it and ultimately becomes a better person for it, Kurt's character weaknesses or flaws or desperation is exaggerated, and he becomes a villain. And it's an interesting dilemma for Peter Parker, because he both cares about this guy and has to stop him. He's both a mentor and an adversary in a very real way. So Kurt gets this feeling of power. Kurt Connors gets this feeling of power and this sensation of this majestic notion about himself, and decides to act upon that. And I think it's interesting because he believes he's doing the right thing, which all great villains do, of course. And I think that was a fun thing to play. Andrew is an extraordinary actor that can handle both the emotional gravitas that is required of a tragic figure like Peter Parker, but he's also got humor and levity, which is another really important part of the Spider-Man character that's baked into his DNA. And that with he can respond to the physical demands that a role like Spider-Man requires in a really great way. And all that wrapped up into somebody who can convincingly play a teenager was a difficult thing to find. And when he walked through the door, it was a pretty easy choice.